Hello, Sylvie Albert. I'm here with my colleague Al McLeod, and we're going to be going through the second video on developing an innovation strategy. So thank you, Al, again. And our first slide, we talk a little bit about strategy and why strategy is important for innovation. I love this quote.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I use it all the time. So it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And of course, Charles Darwin's famous quote. And I love this because it's so true for businesses, but it's true for all of us. It's true for people. It's true for everything. But for businesses, when you really think about it, it's the ability to understand what change is coming and adapt to it. And if you get hit by change, adapt to it.
Exactly.
That's really what it's about.
As we talked in our first video, there's so many environmental changes that have to be considered and their potential impact on organizations that have to be considered.
Right.
So let's go back to that model that we talked about in our first video, those 8 essentials. So what are we covering today under strategy?
Yeah, so today we'll talk about choose, discover, and evolve. And really, when you're in the early days of your innovation startup with your company, you really need to start to think about how are you going to create new business models, how are you going to do those things, and what's right for your industry and your company, and really factor all that into the beginning here.
Exactly. And we talked about that volatile the change that's happening. Here's some other examples that organizations need to consider in terms of the knowledge economy and some of those virtual organizations that are developing. So we don't necessarily have to do business the way that we've always done business. Right. There's so much more opportunities these days with technology, with using knowledge from around the globe. All of the transparency and their impact. We've seen a lot of issues coming with data leaks and all those kinds of things. So cybersecurity is a big issue for most organizations, but also their data and how data has become so important and ways that they might use it in innovative ways to create new business opportunities. So lots of changes that can be incorporated into strategy making, both for short and longer term, and lots of tools also. Right. That organizations can use. So typically as a strategy professor, these are examples of things that we teach our students. I think that there's lots of things that are common sense in terms of really understanding your market segment. Unfortunately, not every business really understand their customers, and much more focus has to be placed because customers are changing, and really understanding how you reach them. Everything has changed quite a bit with regards to things like that. So having another view in terms of how relevant you are now and are going to be into the future becomes really important in devising your strategy. And these might include looking at some of the internal environment issues, things that are maybe not as efficient as what they should be, or we've been structured an old way that no longer will work into the future, and so forth. So lots of analysis that organizations can do to help prepare that strategic plan going into the future, right?
Right.
One of the analysis that was on the list there is that Porter's model of 4 corners analysis. And in that model, basically they said, well, the first thing that you have to determine is what are the drivers, your motivations for doing some things and for changing, and looking at your current strategy to see how relevant it really is, and what kind of assumptions are you making about the market and your competitors, and what are your capabilities going forward, what are you going to have to add, maybe change, and so that analysis sort of starts to lay the foundation for your strategy for innovation, right?
Right.
So these are all. So here's another one that some notes that you've taken around strategy.
Yeah. So when I think of innovation and strategy, I think of this idea of a portfolio of bets. Mm-hmm. But you really have to understand your company, where you are, as you talked about, and where you think you want to go, and then develop that portfolio based around how you want to change your business over time. And this includes efficiency, sustaining, transformational types of innovation, and understanding which of your businesses is under stress, what parts of your business are running well, but maybe the most profitable parts, so you want to continue them to be profitable. Maybe you have parts of your business that are really so good that you can use them to help support other parts of your business. So there's all sorts of opportunities from a strategy perspective to align the innovation strategy with the company strategy, like integrate it. Back when I was in the IT leadership role, there was often a company strategy and an IT strategy. And I hated that. I really disliked that, because really it's one strategy. If it isn't one strategy, it's going to be two strategies, and they will never be completely aligned. In the same way, the innovation strategy has to be part of the company strategy.
Yeah, that systems approach is so important,
Yeah.
because we've operated for so long based on that first model of dividing every job to the highest level of efficiency, but no one is looking at the systems perspective. And I think a lot of systems thinking people will say, well, it's not about having the best part in the motor of a car, it's about the entire car.
Right.
And so if employees are not encouraged to have that systems perspective, they could be developing innovations in one part of the organizations that negatively affects another. Right. And or is not fully taken advantage of, because it's very silo in the approach. So, right. Definitely in your strategy, you need to think about some of the impacts of some of what you're doing. In video number 1, we talked about the ambidextrous organization, and indeed, that's a little bit of a planning document. So, and I think what we need to think about is that, there's different time horizons that have to be thought of. So you can't just be looking at what needs to be done today, right, or over the next 3 years, as you said before. You need to think in terms of, some of the game changers that maybe are going to take a lot more time, but need to be started today. Because it is going to take time, and you're going to have maybe patient capital and developing the capabilities and the leadership and so forth. So did you want to comment on that particular model?
Yeah, and on this model, I think that the one of the most important things is when they talk about ambidexterity is you have to plan your current business. And remember, in our first video, we talked about the natural S-curve, where your company eventually starts, grows, and then eventually declines. And the whole point of having this portfolio is to make sure your company doesn't decline that way, that you're continually doing new things. But what you can't do is take your eye off running your current business models. Right. So that's the ambidextrous part to me, is having a portfolio that is enhancing your current business models while coming up with new business models. That's, to me, a very key part of thinking of your company as an ambidextrous company.
Right. You should be filling all of those boxes, right, not just at one end. Right. And talk to us about these 10 types of innovation that, again, a great model to look at.
Yeah, this is one of the first books on innovation I read, and it's still one of my favorites. So what they did was they analyzed a lot of different innovations from great companies, and they split the companies into these 10 components in these 3 categories: configuration, offering, and experience, and said when they looked at innovations from Nike or from Apple or whatever, and they said, what did they change? Sometimes it would be profit model plus product performance plus service together, and if you look at all the changes they make, the ones, first of all, understand where you have strengths. And if you have strengths somewhere, how do you include that in any innovation you do? Because that makes it tougher for your competitors to copy your innovation.
Right.
Because that's one of the problems. If you create something new, what's to stop somebody from just copying it? Right. If you look at someone like Apple, where they have an interesting product system, great branding, the Apple stores for service, they have all these things together. And when they innovate those things together, it's very tough to beat them.
Plus, they're fast.
and they're fast.
Right.
Right. So knowing what you're good at across these 10 categories and understanding that if you take a couple of these different boxes together and innovate across those two boxes together in a single innovation, it will be powerful and harder to replicate. So I love this model.
Excellent. And one thing that I think is always important is to really understand your own business model to begin with, and maybe talk about this. It's an older canvas, but a very important one, not just for senior administrators, but for the entire organization to understand. And you can put it on one page.
Yeah, it's one of the best things that's ever been done in innovation to me. And the fact that they kind of open sourced it, not completely open source. I mean, the idea is anyone can use it. If you change it, you have to go through some processes. But it's a great model because on a single page, it's meant to be a business, really document summarize your business on a single page. I love it. We use it for everything. Everybody in industry uses it. It's ubiquitous, and it's the basis for us, for strategizers. Terrific strategy. On the left side, top side, you've got your what you do. On the right side, top side, you've got what your customer needs, and in the middle, you actually have the value proposition that you're providing them. And then on the bottom, you talk about your costs and your revenue. So if you look at that, you've really summarized your entire business on one page. And like you said, every one of the businesses that you operate should have a well-documented business canvas so that when you're doing any work, you understand what the impacts are.
Right.
Right. And if you look at someone like a Tesla getting into auto insurance, they can take their current business model of electric vehicles, and then they can superimpose that insurance on top of it and understand how they can provide that using the business model canvas.
And that middle piece, the value proposition, is a key piece because that talks to sustainability and are you really meeting a customer pain, which is sometimes lots of organizations don't really think about those things. We make widgets, we sell widgets, and we don't really think in terms of what value, especially because we have so much competition, right?
Right.
So another great one is this explore and exploit. You want to explain it?
Yeah, this is a model from Strategizer. It sits on top of that business model canvas work that they've done. And what explore and exploit is all about is explore is about looking for those new business models that can restart your curve of your company again. And the axes there are expected return for this new business versus the risk of the new business. And so you're trying to have multiple of these opportunities going at the same time and really doing experiments to see which ones might work, and at the same time understanding that risk and how can you mitigate that risk and playing them off against each other. Exploit is about looking at your businesses that are successful or that you're running and saying, the ones that have the greatest return, how do we continue to make sure that they're successful and grow them? And so your concern there is about the return of that business, the specific business, versus the death and disruption risk. Right. So always you'll have certain businesses that are under more stress than others. And if they're profitable businesses, what do you do about that? How can you use innovation to continue to enhance them, to beat the competition, and extend your curve still?
Right, and it applies to nonprofit as well. I mean, I remember seeing this kind of concept even in academia, where they look at, where is it that we're seeing demand from students for different programs, and how do we get different disciplines maybe working better together to offer what we need in the future in education. So there's all kinds of ways to use some of these tools as you go forward. Is it the same type of team that would work on both sides of the explore and exploit, or?
Yeah, I would have like a team, the same people from an innovation perspective. So typically you would have some innovation team, as small as possible, who is there to facilitate. So they're there to provide the training, lead the project potentially, coaching, and you would have people from the business units who would be seconded or at least part-time on each of these projects that would be there learning and working and bringing the subject matter expertise from
Right.
those different businesses to the table. You may have some people who are a little bit better on the explore side, and they may spend more time there, but the idea is that you would support both of these models with your innovation team and then people from the business
Right.
units for subject matter expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the old model was that you'd have an R&D department,
Sure.
and they would do all the exploration, and then your operations departments would do the exploit end of it. But, you know, I think that when we talk about developing cultures of innovation, you really have to have more flexible people that really understand both sides, right?
The objective over time is not to have one group that is the only group that can innovate. That's if you've done that, that's failure.
Yeah.
You really need to have more and more of these projects, having people on the teams who go back. I remember one project we had where there was a woman who was part of our project, and she was the subject matter leader expert from her group, had never done anything like this before, came in the project at the end after about 3 months, I think the project was, very successful project, and she said to me, "This changed my life. I will never think about business the same way. I'm going back to my business unit and bringing this back with them." And that's the success of changing the culture through the projects, through the training. That's when you know you're being successful.
And I think that brings up a very important point. Innovation happens with diversity
Right.
of thought. So, you know, you want to have as many perspectives as possible. And your stakeholders, not just the internal people in an organization, but people that you interact with, like your suppliers, your regulators, your customers. These are all important actors in your innovation strategy. So
Right.
how do you reach out to them? How do you have as many people in the organization involved with them so they learn how things are changing, how things might be able to get done better? They bring those ideas back. So using and understanding that whole stakeholder network is part of your strategy making for deciding on where you go with innovation, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, again, it comes back to something that we said earlier, that just because you have a great idea, that doesn't mean that it will work, right? And we fall in love with great ideas. So explain to us this little piece of research around customers' view versus organizational views.
Yeah, so there's a fair bit of research about how hard it is to get customers to switch. And this piece of research talks about companies, when they're doing something new, they believe they have the better mousetrap, and that customers are just going to flock to it, and they're going to see the need for the product, and they're dissatisfied with their existing product, and they overweight that by 3 times, this research says. So they think it's 3 times more likely. And then consumers are usually skeptical, and they don't see it, and they don't want to change necessarily. And they're quick to see what they already own, especially if they've already paid for it, as the status quo. So they overweight the incumbent product's benefits by 3. So you've got this multiplier effect of, the companies thinking they have something 3 times better, or that it's 3 times better than it is, and the consumers thinking it's 3 times worse. And so you've got this gap between the two. So you really have to have, if you're going to get customers to switch, it has to be something much better. And that's why you really need to be very innovative and come up with something that is unique and new in order to get customers to switch.
And probably why you have books that come out and talk about the 10x factor, and things have to be an awful lot better than just small incremental improvements.
Right, exactly.
So we come at the end where we are proposing some next steps for anyone looking at developing that strategy. And I think that the first comment that I would make is that it is important to do that analysis internally, externally, to see exactly what's happening and how that environment needs to change, or change will come upon you. And so you have to be ready to act. So that's one first step that I would recommend. So do you want to provide another one?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have an overall strategy that's aligned to your it's your innovation party has to be part of your strategy. It's not a separate strategy, it's part of it. And you really need to understand who your people are. What kind of capabilities do you have? What kind of culture do you have? Do you have a leadership team at the top that is pro-innovation and really understands that? And you have to make plans for all three types, right? So you have to have a portfolio that's balanced, as we said. You can't, and by the way, you can't launch 4 new businesses a year as a normal company. It's not possible. But you can make quite a few incremental changes in a year to keep your business fresh and maybe enhance customer experience. So having that portfolio view is very important. Deciding on what are your metrics, what are your measurements, how do you know if you're successful? Getting agreement from the executive team on what that's going to look like is important. And then making sure that you have the right people, the right resources, and over time, making sure that you're working on both your company and that cultural component. How do you continue to make people excited about innovation and actually get to the point where they're drawing you in, continually tugging on the innovation team to help them, and over time the innovation team becomes a little less important actually, because it's the company is a lot more
Everyone
innovative.
is working on it.
That's right.
With a common vision, and you have engagement.
Right.
Because it'll be exciting to be
Right.
part of an organization that thinks to the future and values your ideas and so forth. So
That's right.
excellent. Well, thank you, Al.
Thank you.